everybody. I have a very long title, but let's stay with girls are to be seen, not to be heard, and I'll explain to you. I hope my paper will explicate why this was the case in Kutch. This is a paper from my doctoral work which I completed in 2008, and it's not I'm not reporting findings of my doctoral project, but I'm reporting to you something that I missed out on, and I only understood it later as an afterthought, and perhaps this should have been attended to. So while I've been very ambivalent about...
Please speak up, please. We'll just get the word.
I'm speaking very loud, but maybe not in the right direction. I'll be louder. So this is a paper that I have developed. That was an afterthought. As I was saying, there's something that I had not captured in the course of the study as such, but it has turned out to be the most sort of illuminating and important sort of realization and finding of my study. So I want to kind of take you very quickly through attachment theory, which is what I used in my doctoral work, which compared trauma of children exposed to 2001 Gujarat earthquake versus those who were affected by 2002 communal riots. The idea was to look at how natural disaster differs from social violence using the framework of attachment and trauma as such. So the main arguments that I present in this paper is they are as follows: that attachment is an innate biological, psychological need. Attachment is a capability, and I'll talk more about it. I'm using it in a very specific way in which Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum have developed it. It's a capability that allows sense of secure self to develop. Attachment trauma, thus, is a capabilities deprivation. I guess that's the main point that I'm trying to make. It occurs when a child's expectation of being loved and cared for is distorted and disrupted. It is a potential social trauma of individuals and families in poverty and marginalization, where one's basic needs are constantly denied and compromised. And then along with that, I think there is an underlying tangent also of what I witnessed in these young girls that I interviewed. I interviewed both boys and girls, but I thought, I found that the girls were very dull, they were boring. I enjoyed my interaction with boys much more. They would play with my laptop, we will have chats, but the girls were very stoic, were very proper and right about the way in which they conducted themselves, and I almost thought that they were very idiotic. I mean, that's what I thought, that there was very limited stuff, very limited material that came out of them, and I just sort of brushed past it all the time, although there was a question at the back of my mind. So I picked up on something that I associate with the phenomenon of shame, and shame emanates from a deeply ingrained sense of self-doubt, threat to a loss of a social bond, social understanding, a weakened and dissolved self in the eyes of the other. Shame is then a social emotion. Development of excessive inhibition, self-doubt in childhood can potentially lead to feelings of shame, vulnerability, and loss of thinking or feeling states of mind. And shame is also generated in a culture of discrimination, marginalization, and disenfranchisement, as we all know. So some of the ideas around, those are the points that I hope the paper, I have published it in a book called Marginality, and also in Psychology in Developing Societies, I think in the last edition. Sorry?
How old are these children?
So they were from ages 8 to 15. I'll tell you more about it. Attachment theory, as you all know, is a theory of normal developmental process, as well as of psychopathology. Attachment is a theory of motivation. It's a relational theory of socio-psychological interactions. It's also a theory of anxiety and defense, as psychoanalytic attachment theorists like the person I worked with, Peter Fonagy, would argue. It's a theory of self, particularly in relation to processes like mentalization. It's a theory that explains the intergenerational transmission of patterns of behaviors and emotions, and I've shown that in my paper. An attachment theory, very briefly and very quickly, and you could tell me if I'm saying the obvious, and perhaps I am. I'll skip those things. Dr. Jory, do you think I should skip this bit?
I should think most people know this, yeah, but...
Yeah. So, you know what Bowlby said, that sensitive caregiving is associated with expectation of comforting and leads to secure attachment, and when this is not taken care of, it leads to sort of insecure attachment. And essentially, the circle of security is about the parent attending to the child's need, saying that the child having this feeling that the parent would protect me, comfort me, delight in me, but also organize my feelings. The circle of limited security is when the child is attending to the parent's need, and sometimes that happens. That is necessary. Circumstances are built in such ways that there's no other alternative, but it is a slight aberration. The child needs support for exploration, but it's not available because the child is kind of catering to the parent's needs. There is also a circle of disorganization, where the child feels fragmented, when there's kind of no resonance with what the child feels, and the parent also comes across as very fragmented, very vulnerable, or very violent. And Peter has talked a lot about violence in relation to trauma and disorganization. So you also know that the intergenerational link is built in such a way that theorists argue that secure attachment leads to secure childhood attachment leads to secure adult attachment, and these patterns, the avoidant patterns, would lead to dismissing patterns in adulthood. The ambivalent resistant patterns would lead to preoccupied patterns in adulthood. But there's also this argument that these attachment patterns aren't really inherited. They can also change. We can change, so they're not really fixed. They're not static. They can change. So there are other arguments as well. I'm going to skip that. I've sort of built up a small qualitative study. Again, I should underscore that I haven't, it doesn't appear in my thesis in this form, but what I present to you is a sample of 12 girls from poor households in Kutch district, and these were earthquake-affected areas of Thingarpur, Lodai, Madhapura, and Khavda, and the girls that I have captured here are from ages 10 to 14, although in my doctoral sample it's from 8 to 15. The mean age is 11.67, but that doesn't make any sense outside of that statistical domain. 3 were Hindus, 4 were Dalit, and 5 were Muslims. And the socioeconomic background of the girls was such that they were living in kacha houses. Typically, a family of 4 or 5 lived on less than $2.5 per day. 8 of them were quite malnourished, anemic. There were lots of infections. Chikungunya was virtually in every household. There were other kinds of developmental disorders as well. All of them worked to contribute to family income. In addition to this, did household chores, looked after younger siblings, and were explicitly told that their education would not continue, there's a mistake there, after class 7. So I think that's the time when the school education, they moved to the secondary school. And what I noticed was that the more poverty I was seeing, the less trauma I was hearing. And in a way, more poverty was kind of making everything very concrete, and which is why the girls appeared much more stoic and less kind of poetic in their narration. Now, attachment framework, and I use the child attachment interview, uses Paul Grice's conversational maxims, which means that you do interviews with people and you have these 4 principles in mind. The idea that you should attend to quantity, the information that people give, and I'm sure psychoanalysts would kind of agree to, this would appeal to them. Quality, the truth, the adequate evidence, about what the content of the material. Relation, how relevant the content is, and manner, whether it's conveyed with clarity, whether it's succinct, whether it's orderly, and things like that. And what I have used in my research is modeled on adult attachment interview. It's a video interview, so there's a lot of visual material there as well. The CAI is copyrighted to the Anna Freud Center, so sadly I can't share that with you, but these are the sort of questions that I asked in a video format, and it is really modeled on adult attachment interview. So questions like, can you tell me about people in your family? So we'll go over descriptions of their selves, of the relationship with the mother, relationship with the father, and things like that. What happens when you're ill? What happens when you get hurt? Have you ever been hit or hurt by an older child? or a grown-up in your family. The idea, as Ainsworth also kind of mentions, is the idea is to surprise the unconscious. So don't only look for whether it kind of makes resonance with the culture. The idea is also whether these constructs are kind of available in a conversation as such. And I did show in my work that to a great degree, attachment concepts did make sense, but there were issues of poverty and extreme trauma that had to be factored in. Okay, so data protection sort of prevents me from showing the actual videos as such, and I hope I will be able to show you at some point. But what I captured from these interviews were themes such as very concrete metaphors, and we know that metaphorization and mentalization are ego processes that are marred in extreme situations, including trauma and poverty. What I also noticed was an identification with the aggressor, and I say this particularly in relation to mothers who are very punitive, and you will hear some statements from the interview that I hope would kind of indicate what I'm sort of suggesting here. There was also a denial of painful and negative experiences, and something here that I struggled with was this inability to assimilate a total picture of the parent. Of course, it was also because there was a lot of denial, but there was also an idealization of parents and relationships, which I think is very culturally specific kind of a response, and had to be understood in a particular kind of a register. There was inhibited narrative. Dismissal was a core strategy, and the dismissal in attachment is like denying the value of things, but the dismissal that I captured on wasn't denying the value as such, but it was something else, and I'll talk about it. It was producing less material, it was a block in thinking, if you like. So the responses that I got was, to the question of, can you describe yourself? The response was, I'm expected to get along well with my family, to be kind to them. Sometimes I think, sometimes I do not, I just follow. I would like to study, so there are different participants. I would like to study so that I never feel that I did not realize my potential, like even if I get married, no one is able to boss or maltreat me. And I often heard, I'm a good girl, my mother is good, my father is good. And don't get me wrong, I sat with them, we had long group conversations, but I wasn't able to kind of break the word good into anything else for that matter. What did you like to eat? Always potatoes. Well, I saw lots of potatoes in Kutch, so that did make sense. But nothing else could be broken down. Relationship with mother doesn't give me money but buys things for me. It's good, I sweep and do all the work. Mom likes it when I work in the house. When Papa tells me not to go to school, Mommy sends me, I like that. Relationship with father was, again, very minimal sort of stuff, and we all know why. It's good, I don't know more. Papa keeps on saying that girls can't do anything. Or some would say, I don't know. He goes in the morning, comes in the evening. Do you feel loved by your parents? Maybe, I don't know. I've never felt this with my papa, but with my mother, yes. Whenever she talks so, I feel that she wants to push me out of the house. She doesn't want me there. Do parents fight? I don't know about that. And obviously the question was kind of meant for a different audience. There wasn't a fight. It was always the father scolding the mother, or there was an element of violence there. The last question of CAI is a rather benign question to just ask if the child had any wishes. And most of these girls said, no, I don't know. I want to be a madam, or mame, as the girls would say. I would like to study till 10th grade. If my father lets me study, I'd like to do a job, and things like that. So 3 response types that I could kind of glean from these, from the transcripts was absence and invisibility, largely due to a general deprivation. I went to poor rural settings. The inhibited narrative was, the narrative was impoverished in quality. It was automaton-like refusal to think, feel, or share, which is what made me irritated about these girls at the start. Unable to comprehend, puzzled, quite prolonged silence. It was a video interview, I had battery, I had to think about. I was traveling 50 to 60 kilometers. It was very tedious, and I wasn't getting any material. So in the short run, I did feel as though I was putting in a lot of effort and I wasn't getting anything. But it only struck me later that they had already conveyed to me what their plight was. or what their attachments were like. Dismissing defensive strategy, inhibited, denial of neediness, adultomorphic responses, very idealized. My mother is good and she's excellent and things like that, but nothing to substantiate it. And you know that these discursive interviews need a lot of substantiation for coding to happen. Shame, inhibition, and recurrent self-doubt. Visibly feeling ashamed of oneself by doubting one's narrative. In fact, I had girls in Parda and I felt as though I was a man sitting there. Poor self-worth, rationalizing, punitive behaviors of parents. Which led me to the question of shame and marginalization. And we know that Freud conceptualized shame as an inhibited emotion. I mean, he said that it has links to repression, but it's very different from symptom. It's like a pre-symptom, if you like. It's a weakness of the ego, and that did kind of make sense to me, that the ego hadn't really developed in some ways. It was a social emotion. It felt like a weakness, and there was a dissolution of self. And of course, it leads to Cooley's ideas of looking glass self as well, that imagination, how we imagine our appearance was the other person, imagination of his judgment of that appearance, sort of feeling of pride or mortification that we associate with shame. Shame also has the links to sociality in many senses, that it's isolating, it's disconnection of a social bond or threat of disconnection. It is also an evaluative experience. Shame is not produced by the situation, but individuals' interpretation of that situation. And in shame, we see the body hunched over in an attempt to hide, as opposed to guilt, where body moves in space trying to repair the action. Oh, okay, thanks. Of course, it links to Peter's work on problems with mirroring, and of course links to the whole psychoanalytic tradition around attachment. But I think this model is kind of interesting in the sense that it says that the child experiences something and conveys something once, an affirmation from the attachment figure, but the mirroring fails. And as a consequence of that, what the child internalizes is some sort of emptiness or a non-contingent mental state as part of self. And I think he's extending Beyond's ideas here. So attachment trauma is the trauma that significantly disrupts a child's expectation of being cared about, or his or her needs being adequately met by a caretaking adult through injury, separation, illness, death, or other disruption of the primary caretaking relationship as we conceptualized it. It has linked to many other things. I'll kind of rush through it. It's negation of one's identity. It's role reversals when children start catering for their parents and the family. And there are many people like Ferenczi who pointed out to the sexualization and the problematics associated with it, confusion of messages, and of course, I think the point, I want to link it up with the development paradigm, because I think that makes the most sense. And attachment, I argue, is a capability. And capability is used in a very specific way by Sane. He says, capabilities are people's potential functionings. Functionings are beings and doings. I think it's a very important point here. And thus, a means of enhancing well-being of its people, a society also needs to focus on the freedom to achieve the intrinsic capabilities of the individuals. Attachment would be seen as a function of a child's capabilities that are intergenerationally nurtured and passed on. There's a dual process of initiation of capability for secure attachment, one which a human being is programmed to strive towards, like love, trust, empathy, etc. And on the other hand, it is also to be harnessed and developed in the course of one's life through socialization. So society has a mandate to actually promote secure attachments in the way I see it, just as it has a mandate to prevent and to pull people out of poverty and trauma, as we talk about in the mental health domain. And so there are this whole potpourri of problems, and poverty, attachment, trauma has this intergenerational strand, which is what my study looked at. I think I can skip that. And I guess the summary is that the attachments were traumatizing in the sense that a young girl's mind and its capacities are marred in an environment that generates constant conflict between needs and discrimination, and along with a lack of love, care, or warmth, takes away any possibility of viewing oneself as a capable human being. I mean, I'm making a long drawn-out conclusion, but I'm sure you will agree with where I'm leading it to. Nurturing attachment also implies nurturing or developing a certain intelligibility, what attachment interviews, I think, or psychoanalytic process, or any inward-looking process captures, is a combination of sensitivities and capabilities in the parent's mind about the larger concerns for the child. And sensitization and empowerment of women enables them to act on their general preferences in making decisions that are in the best interest of their children's well-being, thinking about what sort of mothers will these young girls be, or what sort of women will these young girls become. So I think I'm going to stop here, and thank you.
A very comprehensive presentation of an area which is really quite complex. I'll open the house to questions. Question?
No.
Nupur?
It's more a comment.
Okay, comment.
Do we have the lights on?
You can ask the question in the dark. Shoot in the dark.
Thank you, Manasi. I think that it just made my blood run cold at the at what your last statement about thinking about the kinds of mothering that these young girls will then be capable of, and the link with society's mandate to ensure secure attachments. And I was just curious about how you see this research or this kind of work moving into making an impact on the ground.
I think it will happen via you and what you're doing, and we should collaborate. But I think we have to work with women and we have to work with mothers. I could do the finding of my the key finding from a regression, a terrible logistic regression model, was that it is the security of attachment to the father that decides security of attachment to the mother. So, and there were many other factors that were aligned to this. So I guess we need to work and empower the mothers, and the mothers will be the drivers of change. Well, and the fathers will change in the process, we hope. In the rural context, at least. I saw a very dark side in the rural context, so I will not patronize men in any way, having seen the villages in rural Gujarat.
No, I thought that was a beautiful link you marked for us, attachment as a capability. And we have often wondered at AUD what is psychosocial.
Yes.
And I thought here was a very beautiful clue how attachment and capability.
Yes, I think Peter would have failed me in the dissertation if I had not raised this point, because he was wondering why I was doing attachment. I remain always very ambivalent to it, but I think it's also an en route to practitioners to whom this idea will appeal.
Yes. So it was a very beautiful
Thank you,
link,
I appreciate your comment.
I have a question which is primarily due to my ignorance, I think.
No, go ahead.
When you say mirroring fails,
Yes.
is it imitation that fails?
Explain me. I mean, are you referring to the behavioral sort of imitation bit?
Yes.
I think a lot of criticism that attachment people get is because I think they seem to be talking about very behavioral principles. But I think in every time I read Peter's work on the alien self, I always thought that he was using the Bionian notion that if the parent is not able to capture the child's needs in their own minds, then they leave an empty space. And they dole that out to the child. So I think it's also the bit about the reflective functioning. So you may be right, but it could be slightly more than that. I won't deny that it is a theory guided by behavioral principles, but I think people like him are making links to ideas. But I want hands up.
More questions?
I have a comment and a question. Thank you for your presentation. What struck me is that some of the issues that you were raising here, I see, regardless of what kind of backgrounds the girls are coming, the same issues are rising, especially when it comes to capabilities.
Yeah.
So what would you then with what are we working then with? It's not only poverty. It's not only about the backgrounds.
We know in developing societies or across the world that women are disenfranchised, and it's not because of the income. But I work with a low income group, and I must kind of state it upright. So I'm working with my evidence. But you're right, I agree. I think even with the sample that I worked, so I had a control sample, controlling for poverty, controlling for trauma, and similar things were visible. So you're right, and I guess we have to just sort of work with girls, and I think Amrita kind of laid out the ideas from Kakkar's work, that we have to work with women's rights issue, but also explore femininity, gender inequity, and things like that more carefully. I think it's a big question, sadly I don't have a very neat answer, but it's a good question, I would agree with you.
Okay, well, this would be the last question. Oh, do we have 10 minutes? We have 5 more minutes.
Two comments, Manasi. One, when you bring up this, which is right now there, the shame part,
Yes.
shame and marginalization, I thought Fonagy and Green have had a major debate, and perhaps it's useful to look at the work of the negative here. All the details that you pick up here show that there is a structure
Of course.
which is being created even while somebody retreats or somebody has to retreat. And the psychosocial in that sense is precisely complex, because if psyche retreats, the social takes over. When psyche begins to make inroads, it can't announce its own attachment. So capability may have a slight bit of a burdensome notion on the one who is then supposed to actuate it.
Yes, yes.
So until we show the dialectic, there might be a thing.
Yeah.
The second is how do we take in what Sudhir's writings are emphasizing to us in terms of Desh, Kal, Gun, Sanskaras? How do we look at attachments in that context? I think since you are,
I think I'm too
you have an aspiration of
traumatized
that.
too enamored by trauma, but that's certainly an area I will, but I remain a very ardent student of his work. I'll get better. But I want to comment to a very quick response to your first comment. I think that the main issue between, as I understood, between Fonagy and other people and under Green was that Green said that you can't use these ideas because they're not coming from the couch. So his premise was that actually I'm not going to talk to you at all because that's a different setting from where it is coming. But Tajay, in a very interesting conversation, said that in your sample you're encountering the dead mother thing. And it kind of made sense to me.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Green won't agree and see.
I hope the wisdom dawn.
Green's dead.
Green's dead, that's right. Where is he?
I think it goes both to Manasi and to you, Rachna, because we were talking about it briefly yesterday. But do you think the dead mother and the institutionalized mother have something in common there, where the retreat is?
Yes.
Well, since it comes to me as well, yeah, that's true. I think the institutionalized mother is hopefully not taking over. We were discussing Rich yesterday, she and I, is not hopefully taking over the entire experiencing mother. That would be one way of looking at it. But also, I think that there is no doubt about the fact that what you're saying is entirely true, that, to the extent that the mother is the primary attachment figure, and she repeats the cycle of engendered development, specifically vis-a-vis the girl, maybe projecting, etc., onto her, all kinds of neediness. And I think there is a difficulty there. But I have a last question, which maybe I will ask you, that there is also rethinking going on, although attachment theory has become one of the most powerful paradigms. And in that sense, it has a very universal appeal. But there is some rethinking going on about whether there needs to be a cultural reconceptualization of attachment itself. And I've been very interested in that question. So I wonder whether you have something.
I have, the way in which I have kind of made it useful and senseful to the sort of work I did was to make these connections with development issues, to bring out things like shame and also point to the inadequacy of some of the questionnaires. But I think ultimately, if we don't pick up on things that we see, and like the way in which I was almost going to miss this very key thematic, I think none of the tools and none of the devices, none of the theories ever would make any sense. So I think so it has to also be phenomenological. I think in that sense it will be, that's my quick response. But thank you very much, I appreciate all the comments.
So thank you.